It's Wednesday, the 7th of December, and this is the Ask TCW podcast live. Hello and welcome to this week's Ask TCW podcast. It's a bumper podcast for you this week with not just 23 questions to talk about. Joining me, Aaron Lord, is Andy Haywood.
Evening.
And Jono Bullard.
Good evening.
Good evening, gentlemen. I hope you are both well. As I say, we have 23 questions this week to go through. So thank you very much. 23, can you believe it? There are actually 23 people that want to hear your views. Can't understand it, but there you go.
In all seriousness, it's a phenomenal response rate to this. So if you think about the number of people who listen and the number of questions we get, that is really incredible. So thank you, everyone.
I mean, pretty much it means that just one person that listens hasn't sent in a question. Everybody else has. So, but thank you very much to everybody for sending in your questions. If you're listening to us live, send us a tweet. Our Twitter handle is @CastWhiskersTV. Use the hashtag AskTCW. And you know what? We'll do a good old-fashioned shout out. So give us a tweet if you're listening live. But you know what? If you're listening as a normal podcast, you can tweet us as well. But shall we get started, guys?
We shall.
Okay, now, I don't know whether you know this, but the Nottingham Panthers has actually signed a new player, Jason Williams. And we have a few questions regarding this signing. So I'm going to kick off with Phil Doherty's question. He asks, do you think a couple of stellar signings could end up in Nottingham to help in the Continental Cup? And just quickly before you answer that, I'll go on to the next question because it kind of ties in the same. Ali St. Clair asks, Jason Williams is a good start. What do you think are the chances we will sign another one or two? Plus, is he really not cup tied? So, Andy, do you want to kick us off on that? Do you think maybe one or two more might be following Jason Williams?
I certainly wouldn't be surprised. I think with the interview in the week regarding changes and obviously the signing that we've made already, it certainly wouldn't surprise me if we were looking to delve into the market a little bit more. I certainly, from a personal standpoint, perhaps think we should be. I no matter how good this signing potentially could be, because he looks like a brilliant signing. I don't think he's all of a sudden going to change our fortunes around too much straight away. So I would like to think that perhaps we might be making at least another splash. And depending on how bad War and Dimon are, hopefully it'll be on defence maybe.
Okay, Jono, do you think it'll just be Jason Williams, or can you see maybe another one or two coming in?
I think another one or two will come in. I think realistically the Continental Cup is probably now our only really decent chance of winning something. So
you've been saying that for a while.
I have been saying it for a while. You are absolutely right. So I think he will not be the first. I think at least another one, possibly two. I wouldn't even be surprised to see three more. And like Andy said, it depends on how bad the injuries to Jeff Dimon and Jeff War are. So I would like to see maybe one or two defensemen bought in the same way we bought in Quick and McDonald last season.
Okay, just very quickly on the sort of cup tide issue. A lot of people, obviously, he's played for Written, obviously another team that's fighting to win the Continental Cup Super Final. Do you guys think he will be cup tied, or surely the Panthers wouldn't have signed him if that was going to be an issue? Would they, Andy?
Well, I wouldn't have thought so. I presume that these type of things they've already thrashed out with the relevant people. I would imagine that he won't be, because I can't see why we wouldn't want a player of that calibre playing in the Continental Cup. But then, if he is cup tied, I suppose it shows that, you know, no matter how much we think it's all over, and it's been a sort of a write off of a season already in early December. I suppose it might show that the club are actually thinking, you know, of making pushes elsewhere, whether it be in the league or the cups and the playoffs, and trying to salvage something. So I don't think he'll be cup tied, because I don't see why we would have signed him specifically, I suppose. But if he is, I don't think it sort of detracts away from the signing, because it's one hell of a player, and obviously if he can make a decent fist of it over here, like he certainly has the attributes to, then, you know, we could be in for a more of a positive end to the season than start.
Okay, talking about the end of the season, moving on to Jordan Brandom question. They ask, what would be a realistic finish in the league now after current affairs, even with Jason Williams signing and possible other changes? Jono, currently 6th, the Nottingham Panthers. What would be a realistic finish for you in the league?
I honestly can't see us finishing any higher than 5th. I think Sheffield and Cardiff are miles ahead of us. I think Belfast are better than us, even though we beat them the other week. I think Fife are looking good. Manchester are looking dangerous. Dundee even are in form. Coventry look like they're putting a bit of a run together. I honestly can't see us finishing any higher than 5th, sadly. I wish I could be more confident, but just on what I've seen so far this season, I just can't see us beating where we came last season.
And is that down to our form, or is it a mixture of our form and obviously some of the teams that you mentioned just a few seconds ago?
I just think other teams are better. I think other teams are better than us. So
fair dues.
That's why.
Well, the table doesn't lie come the end of the season, does it, to be honest? Yeah. So I suppose we'll see. But Andy, very quickly, you obviously talked about maybe it's a sign from the club that potentially they might still believe in a league push, but where would think is a realistic finish for us?
I still think we'll be top 4.
Top 4. So you actually think better than JB, obviously? Yeah.
I think overall, you know, we've had a really bad start, and we've not been good. But I'd be staggered if we continue on this slump as bad as we are. You know, if you consider that we went, was it 6 games losing, and then obviously we won 2, and then we've now gone 3 games losing. I would be staggered if that's kind of the form continues, that we sort of, you know, lose in massive bunches and only win a couple in between. So I still think that overall we'll. Don't get me wrong. I'm fully resigned that the league's gone, and probably second place as well at that. But you know, I still think we'll probably scrape 4th, 5th. You know, I think we'd probably end up with a home tie in the playoffs. But I think ultimately there is that chance that we could come 5th. But you know, I still think we'll probably finish top 4.
Okie dokie, I guess time will tell. Thank you, Jordan. Moving on to a question from Twitter, and it's from @MrPack75. They ask, will Jason Williams be enough, or do we need more players? And can he afford to get rid of anyone with the injury list so long? Now, obviously, you know, you talked about injuries before, both of you two, you know, regarding Jeff Dimon and Jeff Waugh. I mean, you know, it's all right signing these players, but you still got to wait for visas, etc. and stuff. So, do we need more players? I think we've already talked about that briefly. But what about the whole injury list? Can he afford to get rid of anyone, JB?
No, not at the minute. You look at who we got out. We've got our high scoring Brit forward. We've got our 2 probably highest minute taking defensemen, and we're short in defence because Sam Oakford left. So, no, we can't afford to get rid of anyone at the minute. I think only when everybody is fully fit can Corey then assess where he needs to bring down the axe, because he will have to, because the budget will tell him that he has to, because you can't carry 17, 18 imports. It's not feasible. So I think he has to wait until everyone's a fit. And with our sort of record as we've been going on the past 2 seasons, will there be a time when everyone's fit? I'm not so sure.
Well, you've literally just took the words right out of my mouth, because I was going to actually say to Andy, with our history of injuries, will that time ever come for Corey to actually have the opportunity to wield the axe, really?
Well, yeah, it's a tough one. History tells us no, probably not. We've talked about it before on the podcast, and I think we might have a question tonight about it. The injuries and the sort of the amount that we get is just so frustrating, and there's not, seemingly it looks as if there's not a lot we can do about it, but I don't know if there is, and obviously if there's a proper strength and conditioning sort of coach or anything like that, I'd be staggered if the players weren't on some sort of regime, but whether that's good enough for a professional hockey team, I don't know. But obviously, certainly, history and currently at this stage of the season tells us, there is every chance that we will never get a full fit squad to choose from for the rest of the year.
Okay, we've actually had our first message come in from Twitter. It's obviously, I'll give you a guess, you two, who you think it's from. 10 points to you, Mr. Haywood. Hello, Ant. Good evening. He asks, are we not capable of going on a long unbeaten run Devils style? Yes or no from you two?
No.
Not of Devils style. I think we're capable of going on a long unbeaten run, but not 23 games winning like they did. Was it 23 or 22? I don't think.
It was early 20s, wasn't it?
I don't think
it was 21.
Again for a long time.
No. That was a world record at the time as well. I think 5 or 6 maximum with this team.
Well, Ant says, Ant doesn't think we are. He says, no, we're not with this squad, in his opinion. And it's going to take something like that, isn't it? Really, it is going to take a long unbeaten run to even put us back in contention.
Forget about it. It's not going to happen.
Okay, forget about it, guys.
Sorry, I hate being so down. I hate being so down. I hate being so negative. But realistically, come on, it's just not going to happen.
Well,
I wish it would. I really hope I'm proved wrong, but.
Well, we've got a question about being downbeat and stuff like that later that we'll come on to. But just to kind of wrap up the Jason Williams questions for the time being, this one comes from Kenwin Jones. Thank you, Kenwin. He says, with the news of Jason Williams arriving, does anyone know the identity of the Panthers now? I would just personally say us signing Jason Williams, for me, doesn't really give us any more of an identity than what we had at the start of the season. I think for us to create our identity or get back to our identity, we need a lot more than just one signing. There's stuff off the ice as well as on the ice that needs to be done. But JB, do you feel that Jason Williams adds to a Panthers identity?
I don't think we have an identity. We haven't for a long time. If you say to anyone, get 20 Panthers fans together, say to each one what's the Panthers' identity, I bet you get 20 different answers, because we don't have a collective identity. Steelers do. Orange. As much as I hate the colour orange, that is their identity. Devils, red. Yeah, that's their identity, and we don't have one.
But people might be listening to this now and they'll be going, well, come on, it's black and gold. We are the black and gold GMB Nottingham Panthers.
Are we? Yeah, yes, we say we are black and gold, but are we really? Is that our identity? You see so many different colours on a game night. See the different colours that we've worn across the seasons. I don't think we have any sort of definitive identity. I think it's something that we should certainly bring back. I'd be happy if we did have a black and gold or a yellow or a white and just pick a colour and that's it. But I don't think we have an identity at all. I don't think we have for a long time.
Andy, do you think Jason Williams arriving adds to our identity, or are you on kind of the same path as JB, saying that what is our identity in the beginning?
Well, I think he probably fits. Again, going on stats and obviously going on before we've seen him play, and now he's going to fit. I think he actually fits certainly Corey's identity as a coach quite well. He looks like he's going to be a player that's going to be, able to put up points. He looks like he's going to be fairly skillful. He's been quoted as being a top 6 forward in the NHL a few years ago now. I appreciate, but that kind of skill and that kind of play, he should be very good in this league. And I think he fits into that sort of identity of team that Corey tries to sign with the attacking flair players going forward. And I think whilst I agree that things like the whole shirt thing and the club colours and stuff like that is always it's always a mismatch. I will be surprised if we don't have some sort of special jersey for the 27th against Sheffield, because we seem to every year. But I think the identity sort of lies more than just what we're wearing. I think it's the style of play. I think it's the way the team plays, the way it's coached. And I think with Corey, there's always been that emphasis on attack and getting really skillful flair players. I hope that they're going to sort of open games up and get you wins. So I think Jason Williams being signed certainly addresses what we've lacked so far this season, and that's a real sort of flair. It's noticeable that when Schultz has come back, that we look a lot more threatening going forward when he's on the ice. When he wasn't here and when he wasn't playing, that was a massive hole that has been filled very briefly. It's only a couple of games now since he's come back, but hopefully, if he keeps fit again, and obviously this new guy comes in and plays like we're all hoping, then maybe we might see a bit more of that attacking flair coming back.
Okie dokie. Well, thank you everybody for sending in your questions regarding Jason Williams. Obviously, it's going to be a couple of weeks until Jason arrives in the UK. It's being obviously billed as potentially a Christmas present for the fans. So you would hope that, I don't know, Dundee on the 23rd, or at least the Steelers doubleheader maybe on Boxing Day and the day after. But I'm sure we will wait and see for any updates from the club. Moving on to a couple of questions now. Obviously, within those previous questions, we've talked about that we think there's going to be maybe 1, 2, potentially even 3 signings. So that means, other people are going to have to be cut. So a couple of questions regarding that from Colin Basford and Dill1015 from the Cage. Colin asks, who in your minds needs to be cut loose for other additions? And Dill1015 asks, who would you like to see replaced from the current squad? So we've, like I just said, we've mentioned 1, 2, 3 potentially new additions. Who, in your eyes, JB, is vulnerable for that chop to make way for those new guys?
You've got to look at a lot of the people who've been mentioned already. I think Logan McMillan, as well as he did last season, he's just not done it so far this season. Even though he is a defensive forward, for an import forward to only score 2 points isn't good enough, unfortunately. You look at the likes of Matt Carter. He's flattered to deceive, to be perfectly honest. He's obviously got better as over the past couple of weekends and it was a fantastic goal he scored against Sheffield on Saturday. There's no getting away from that. But he was expected to put a lot of points up, and he really hasn't so far. So I think he's someone who's going to be looking over his shoulder. Of the others, there's been a lot of criticism about Dan Spang, but I actually quite like him. I actually think he's okay.
Yeah,
I think he's quite a decent D-man, to be honest.
There's just one thing that has annoyed me about Dan Spang, and it was a home game. I can't remember whether it was against Sheffield or the one previous, but there was just one instant where he had his helmet kind of nudged off his head a little bit, and he kind of put it over his eyes for a couple of seconds, and he kind of skated around for just 1 or 2 seconds with his stick as if he couldn't see properly. And this was in our own, D zone. And I just thought, hang on a minute, you're taking, most players would have put it back on straight and gone, and concentrated on their man. And he just sometimes, for me, has that kind of, not lackadaisical, but very relaxed. It's very hard to say him thinking that I'm better than this league. I can, take 10% off my game. I don't know. There's just that, and I just that made me feel a little but a bit uneasy about him. But a lot of people have mentioned him, but I think other people have said that he is a quality player as well. But you've mentioned obviously the potential of bringing in a couple of D-men. So if it's not Dan Spang, who else is it?
Well, again, that depends on the injuries, doesn't it? Because if War or Dimon are out long term, then the new signings replaces either of them, to be fair. If you're bringing in another D-man, I don't know, really. Let's be honest. Steve Lee hasn't really set the world alight so far this season.
Yeah, but that's a Brit.
But he's Brit. He's a Brit, so you can't get rid of him. So, and the thing is, we're short on defence. I think we started with 7 D-men.
Yep.
And now we've got 5, and 2 of those are injured. So
exactly, and maybe this just opens up the more questions about injuries, which will come on later. About we don't know how long the 2 Jeffs are out for.
We've got more than 5 D-men.
Who we got?
Well, let's go through. So we've got Dan Spang.
Yeah.
We've got
Kudrock.
Jeff Dimon, Jeff Watt, Kudrock. Stevie Lee.
Yeah.
That's 5.
Sertic,
that's sorry. Yes. And then obviously you could say Linda Hagen can go on to D if needed.
Yeah. But
I
completely forgot about Andy Sertic.
It's all right. I was more concerned that I was amazed that we were only playing 3 D-men against Sheffield this weekend, because obviously War and Dimon didn't play, and I thought that we must have more than 5.
And obviously at times Logan McMillan's played on D as well. But Andy, who would Jono's obviously mentioned a few names there. Who for you would be up for the chop?
Well, to be fair, I think he's pretty much nailed it. I think you've got to look at who's underperforming and who's not performing as well as we would like to think. I would like it if nobody was going to get chopped because they were all doing their job. But unfortunately, we've seen too often so far this year that they haven't been in that sense. They've not been cutting the mustard. I think McMillan unfortunately is a shadow of his former self. I really do. I think he's nowhere near the heights that he set last year. And I think obviously Carter has been one that's obviously been spouted a lot. And I think it's just because we were expecting big things from him, and rightly so. We were expecting big things from him with his kind of resume, and the type of player that he is. And the frustrating thing is, you see things like on Saturday, and you know he's got it in him, but for some reason, it's taken so long to sort of get it out. And if that's a turning point, then great. But if this next weekend we go back to the same old, then certainly he's got to be looking over his shoulder.
Okay, well, I suppose we've seen, with Jason Williams coming in and the interview and then the update on the website that changes are potentially afoot. So I suppose we will wait and see. But thank you very much for your questions on that. Moving on, and we've talked about injuries and the fitness and everything like that. So a couple of questions regarding that issue. But just before that, Colin Baseford, who obviously we've just answered his question, has got in touch, and he reckons our identity is the blow-up bear. So there we go. With that, I don't know whether that's the identity that we really want, but I suppose we will see whether we create a stronger identity, shall we say. But thank you very much for getting in touch, Colin. So first question regarding injuries. This one comes from Absy Babsy, who actually sent the tweet and question in on last week's show. So apologies for not being able to answer it then, but we will do now. Injuries, health, fitness, energy levels. Anyone think that we should have a strength coach like league-winning season? And then another question from Jordan Brandom, who obviously got in touch earlier on as well. It says, do our coaches actually know the extent to injuries at times with replacements not brought in? And is this down to lack of communication between our club? Now, guys, we've talked about the whole strength and conditioning coach on many podcasts, whether that be Ask TCW or just general podcasts throughout the weeks. Everybody knows that Mark Coles, M10 Fitness, was involved during the league-winning season. He works with, used to work with Brits throughout the season and off-season as well. Very successful in his field. Me personally, you could see that he made a massive difference. We won a lot of our games in the third periods just purely because we were physically stronger, fitter, that we could actually maybe go up another gear in that third period when other teams were struggling. Now, I think everybody knows he's not with the Panthers anymore and hasn't been, I think, since that season. But we don't know whether there's a strength conditioning coach. Obviously, we all know that, Scott Poundle is the physio for the club. But, with the injuries that we've had over many seasons, JB, as you mentioned earlier, should this be an area that the club look into further?
It should be an absolute priority. That should be what the club is looking at before players, in my opinion. Is a proper, a full-time strength and conditioning coach, someone to come in and put in regimes, put in diet plans, put in fitness regimes. It's an absolute no-brainer for me. Look at what it did in the league team. Mark Coles was superb. We had a fit team. We had very few injuries. And look what's happened since when he's not been around. It does. The evidence is all there that shows that it works. Just get it sorted.
Yeah, and Andy, just in regards to Jordan's question, like I mentioned earlier, we don't know how long Jeff Dimon and Jeff Warr are out for. He asked, does our coaches actually know the extent of the injuries? You would hope that obviously, the coaching staff know how long these players are out for, but the club have never mentioned it to the fans or to the outside world, and that's just the way it is, isn't it? Really, I mean, is that a lack of communication in your eyes, like Jordan potentially says?
I think as fans, we want to know what's going on ultimately, and so that's why when players get injured, we want to know what it is, how long they're going to be out for. Will we be replaced, and all those kind of questions. And as a club, we don't sort of deal in that. We never have really. And I would be. To be fair, I'd actually be disgusted if there was no communication back to the coaches on how bad the injury is or how long they're likely to be out for. I'd be, like I say, I'd be disgusted if I found out that wasn't getting back to the coaches so that they could make decisions. But there will be players that have some injuries where you can't really put a timescale on it. I always remember when Kowalski did his groin. For the position that he was, realistically, you could never really tell when he was going to be back fully fit until he was, and it was very much a sort of waiting game with it. And yes, you have sort of guidelines and estimates and that kind of thing, but obviously sometimes they can be completely thrown out, the water. But I would be amazed if the coaches didn't know what was wrong with people and how long they were likely to be out for. But I certainly don't think it's quite as cut and dry as player X is going to be out for 6 weeks. Therefore, we will go out and sign this guy today to cover him for the 6 weeks that he's going to miss. I think there's a lot more red tape that goes on that's involved.
Okay, well, thank you very much for your questions regarding the injuries. If you do have a question for us and you're listening live, you can get in touch with us via Twitter. Just get in touch using our Twitter handle @CatsWhiskersTV and use hashtag AskTCW. If you're listening to us as a normal podcast during the week at any time, then you can still get your question in using the same method and we will answer it in a future show. Moving on. So we will move on to something that was announced during the week. We'll just move slightly away from the Panthers and into the world of the Elite League as a whole. Now, tomorrow is Thursday, and if people aren't aware, the Elite League has announced a new TV deal, and Steve Wright has asked us a question on this. So he says the EIHL have announced a TV deal and highlights program on a free-to-air sports channel that few people have heard of. How much benefit will this be to British ice hockey? Now, for everybody that doesn't know, then obviously the Elite League have announced a TV deal with Frontrunner TV, which is available on Sky Freeview, but it's not available on Virgin TV. Now, it will be a highlight show, first aired on a Thursday, and then it will be repeated on a Friday and Saturday, and also will be available the following day, that being the Friday, on the Elite League website. Jono, we talked about this quickly before we kind of pressed the live button, but answering Steve's question, how much of a benefit do you think this will be to British ice hockey?
I've got to be careful here because, I've obviously been involved with Premier Sports. So, I don't know.
With your neutral head on that.
It's difficult to say. It's difficult to say as a fan because until yesterday I'd never heard of Frontrunner Sports. And I would guess... And
I think that's fair to say. I don't think, sorry to jump in, but I don't think many people have heard of it. No. We're not the only people that haven't heard of it.
And this is the thing. I mean, it's great that they've got something on a Freeview, free-to-air channel. I think brilliant. But it's a channel that very few people have heard of. Now, obviously, hockey fans have now heard of it because of the announcement. But how are they going to draw in the people who've not really aware of British hockey if people have never heard of the channel that it's on? And this is what I can't get, because I think fair enough, great, it's on a free-to-air channel that everybody theoretically can access, but I believe they're having to pay, or the league is having to pay to produce this show. Premier Sports offered them $150,000 for a 3-year deal. So I just don't get the sense in that, because Premier show all the hockey in this country. They show NHL, SHL, Champions Hockey League, all the World Championships, etc., etc. So I don't understand why the Elite League would want to be on there. Okay, it's not going to draw in people like being on a free-to-air channel. I get that. But you've got things on Premier like the NRL, you've got NASCAR, you've now got darts on there as well. that other people can see your brand. And I just think it's a case of they've just accepted the first deal that's come their way, rather than really thinking about it. In my opinion, they should have taken the Premier deal at the start of the season. We've now had 3 months of the season with no exposure because there's been no TV coverage. Great, they've now got this deal with Front Runner, but is it really a good deal? I don't know. Only time will tell.
Do you think they're, obviously you talked about the Premier Sports, etc. Do you think the league are hung up on the words free to air?
Yeah, I think they are, because it's not like 20 years ago where you only had 4 or 5 channels to go through. You've now got multiple channels on Freeview. I think Front Runner is something like channel 91.
91, yeah.
If you are surfing through the channels, are you going to go that far? This is what bothers me. I hope it works, and I really do hope it brings a great deal of exposure for the game, but I honestly don't think it's going to.
Okay, let's bring Andy into this discussion now. Andy, are you kind of as wary as JB is, or do you have a bit more belief that this is the way it to go? Will it benefit the British ice hockey, in this country?
Ultimately, I don't think it will benefit, but I don't think it will benefit any less than Premier. At the end of the day, we are a minority sport, and breaking into a majority sport, one, I don't think will happen, full stop. And two, if it does happen, it's going to take years and years and years of near perfect exposure to build it up to that kind of level. I think from my own personal view, and as a subscriber to Premier Sports and a Virgin Media customer, so I can't watch it, I personally think it's a better deal because it is free to air. So people who haven't got Premier Sports because it's a subscription channel and it's a premium channel, will be able to give it a go at the very least. There shouldn't be too many people, too many households that follow British hockey that won't be able to watch it. Whereas, obviously, with it being on Premier, yes, it's the home for hockey, and I appreciate that. But I still think it's a relatively closed book. The people that subscribe to Premier Sports for the ice hockey are already aware of the ice hockey. The people who watch Front Runner for the ice hockey will already be aware of the ice hockey. It's not going to draw in new fans, but I don't really think that Premier is ever going to do that either on such a scale that it's going to give us incredible exposure to take us into, new heights. Yes, you might get the odd one or two that have shown an interest, and I know when we had Aaron Murphy on, he spoke about a couple of people that he saw at a game, I think it was, where they commented saying that they were watching something and they thought they'd give the hockey a go because it was on straight afterwards. But ultimately, realistically, the people that subscribe to Premier Sports to watch hockey are the people that already know it's there. And I think the fact that it's free to air, yes, it's on a channel nobody's ever heard of. Yes, the channel's in the high 90s, so you're not going to get people flicking through and finding it by mistake and enjoying it. But I think it gives people a better chance of watching it because it is free to air.
Okay. If you want to actually listen to the Elite League kind of stance on this, then Neil Black did an interview with Seth Bennett. You can listen to that interview if you go to the Elite League website. Just sticking with this very briefly, obviously it's a highlight show at the moment. The first show is tomorrow and it starts at 6 p.m. called Facing Off. Just very quickly, Jono, I'll ask you this and then we'll move on. It's a highlight show that, it's going to be from the highlights that the clubs do themselves. Thursday, is that a little bit late for you? Because usually, by that time you would have seen the highlights on YouTube. So do you think that's kind of a little bit too late in the in the week for something like this to be a success, or do you think because it's on free to air, they are literally going for the fans that have no idea about searching for ice hockey highlights on YouTube?
I think it is probably a little late. I think Tuesday would probably be a better day to have it. I think when Premier did their highlight show, I think that might have been on a Tuesday, but don't quote me on that. I can't properly remember, but I think it is probably a little late. But then you have got the advantage, if they do look ahead to the weekend games, you can say, well, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, there's games in your area. So I suppose there's that way of looking at it. But I think maybe it is probably a little bit late.
Okay.
Just quickly, just to touch on a point you made there, Aaron.
Yeah.
Regarding the fact that it's going to be, it's going to be the highlights that are given to them by the clubs and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
You see, that in its own right will always be our downfall as a league. Until we can get decent quality highlights throughout the league, I don't think it's ever going to be attractive enough to draw people in. So regardless of whether it's on Premiere or Frontrunner, whether it's free to air or pay per view, if you're just putting the highlights that you get from the teams, I don't think it's going to be enough to draw people in because some of them look shoddy. I think realistically, from the ones I've seen, there's only really Sheffield that I would say is at the standard that we should be sort of not necessarily broadcasting, because that makes it sound like the rest are unwatchable, but certainly of a standard that you would expect for a sports highlights programme.
Yeah, for me, I'd probably have to add in Cardiff with Icetime TV and potentially Belfast Giants TV as well. I think they're up there with Sheffield as definitely the leaders of the pack. But it'd be interesting to see. Obviously we'll talk about facing off potentially more in a later podcast. But sticking with the Elite League. And obviously, this is another question from Colin Basford. Obviously, had a lot of questions to get off his chest this week. Do you think all the Elite League teams should come together and refute the fines for speaking out? A coach has every right to say what they think after a game. I agree on players on social media after the game is done, but not coaches. I would also say that the only people who miss out are the fans and reporters in this situation. Now, obviously, a week or so ago, there was the Elite League that brought in the fines for all the dispute and, kind of the abuse that was being spoken about regarding, officials and DOPS process, etc. And this actually led to the Nottingham Panthers not saying anything after a game against Sheffield. Now, that was to the public and also to the local reporter from the Nottingham Post. So, I mean, Andy, quickly, do you think the Elite League team should look at this and kind of say, no, we are not willing to accept this? Or do you think it was right from the Elite League to bring in this fine, basically?
I don't have an issue with the fining process. I think you look at all sports, and I will be drawn to the ones that are sort of I know of more of. You see things like managers in the football being fined for comments made about referees. You see, as a Leicester Tigers fan, we're forever seeing Richard Cockerell being fined for things that he said to the press regarding games, coaches, other teams, match officials, and stuff like that. They have to be held accountable for what they say, and they have to watch what they say, particularly regarding officials and the league itself. So I don't have an issue with it. I don't necessarily have an issue with our stance on it at the moment. I think particularly after some games where there's been a decision that goes against you, and obviously we've made a press release about the whole chin strap debate. I think it was probably a wise thing to not do any press sort of speaking straight after the game where you feel so strongly about a decision that went against you, and you've ended up losing the game. It might not be a bad thing to have the odd game where you don't speak because for fear of getting a fine.
Jono, do you agree? With what Andy just said there?
Yeah, can't really add anything to what he said. I agree completely.
Okie dokie. Well, we'll see how the clubs kind of get on with this fine, and whether there will be more fines handed out throughout the season, or whether we see teams follow suit and just actually don't say anything after a game and keep their mouths stum. But thank you very much for that question, Colin. So we'll move back towards the Panthers now, and this one, these few questions actually revolve around the Continental Cup, and the first one comes from David Spence, and he asks, is Neil Black only prioritising the Continental Cup to raise his own profile in light of the ongoing development of the London KHL franchise, rather than for the benefit of the club? Jono?
No, I don't think he is.
Is that because he cares about the Panthers too
much?
No,
I don't think that he is going to be heading up a London KHL franchise purely due to the costs involved of setting one up. I think it's something in the region of $80 million. And as successful as a businessman that Neil Black is, I don't believe he's got that amount of disposable income at his disposal in order to set up a London KHL franchise. I think there's a possibility that there could be a London KHL franchise, but I think it's somebody else who's going to be setting that up. I don't think Neil Black will be involved.
Okay, Andy, I'll ask you the next question to tie in with David's question, and this one comes from Phil Doherty, and he says, do you think we've recruited badly, or have we not got the same budget as in previous seasons? With the Cup and extra travelling, has Neil Black tightened his belt? So, do you think Neil Black has potentially tightened his belt this year, and do you think personally maybe that could be because of the London KHL franchise?
I don't think it'll be to do with the London KHL franchise. I do think that perhaps there's not as much quality as perhaps we've seen in previous seasons. Whether that's because of we should have been expecting the quality, but they've just not performed, or whether that's down to the fact that we've perhaps not been able to sign that kind of quality. Because of budgets, ultimately as fans we won't really know. I would say going back on last season's team to this season's team, I would say that there is probably a lack of quality, even on paper. You look at the fact that we've lost players like Kolnick and David Ling, obviously, although I appreciate he came in late and obviously left early. Kevin Quick was an all-star in this league when he was here with Dundee. There were real sort of big name, big signing players in that team. Andy Bombach, another one, that's just sort of come back to me. And then you've got your returning players. So realistically, Evan Mosey probably would have been don't get me wrong, he wouldn't have been the highest earner on the team, but because we knew what he was capable of, and because we expected more of him last season, he probably would have been on more of a pay rise than anybody else from the season previous. And I do think that we've probably lost a lot of quality this year in comparative quality to last season, and whether that's because we've spent big money on certain players, or we've given the returning players big pay rises because of last season, or whether it's just because the budget wasn't quite there. I would imagine that realistically, the budget doesn't usually budge too much. I wouldn't have thought. It might fluctuate a little bit, but I imagine it's relatively stable most seasons. But I just think that perhaps on paper we do lack a bit of quality that we saw last season.
Okay, moving on to another question. Now this comes from Simon Hunt, and before you all get excited, I'm afraid to say it's not the real Simon Hunt. It is actually somebody from the Cage. And they ask, if the priority was to win the Continental Cup, why did we sign such a poor side? Do the club consider the Cup a lower standard than the league? After watching this league since 1981, the club that spends the most money usually finishes top of the pile. Do you think Panthers will ever spend what is required? Now, just in relation to the first part of that question, the Nottingham Panthers in the Continental Cup aren't a poor side, because that's how we've got through to the Super Final. Let's see how we perform there come January. But, you know, in the league, obviously, it can be classed that we are a very poor side. But to answer Simon's question, Jono, you know, do you think Panthers will ever spend what is required? And do you think that they consider the Cup a lower standard than the league as well?
Dear. It's a difficult question. I don't think... I think if we really wanted to, we could blow every other team out of the water with what we spend.
I mean, and that is one thing to bring up, sorry, just very quickly. We don't know what the Panthers spend. You know, there's only probably a handful of people that know the budget that Corey and Rick Strachan have got. So, you know, we might be spending what should get us the league title, but we don't know that, do we?
Neil Black is a successful businessman, and the reason he's a successful businessman is because he's a clever businessman. He makes money, and if he spent all the money he makes out of Panthers, ploughed it back in on the team, then he's not going to make any money out of the club. So, you know, as much as us as fans want him to spend all that available cash on the squad, realistically, is a businessman such as him going to do that? No, he's not. However, I do think sometimes we probably do cut the cloth a little too short sometimes. And I think maybe spending a little bit more would pay dividends later on in the season. It's like now we've got Jason Williams in. Should we have been having players of that calibre at the start of the season? And would we be in the position that we are now? I don't think we would. As for, do the club consider the Cup a lower standard than the league? I'm not really sure, but you'd have to ask the club that. The first round was a joke because of the teams that were involved, apart from the last team that we played. And then the next round was more on a par with the Elite League, I think. So, it's a really tough question to answer. I don't think they consider it a lower standard than the league. I think the Super Final is probably going to be a slightly higher standard than the Elite League. But I don't think we should go into that final fearing anything, to be honest.
I mean, I would personally say, just to jump in a little bit, that if, you know, no British team has ever won this competition, so for it to be a lower standard than the league, you would think that a team of especially more recent time, because our league has grown stronger and stronger and stronger, would have been able to at least get through to the Super Final and compete to win that competition. So surely the Cup does have to be of a higher standard than what our league has. Would you agree with that? Or
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we are the first club to qualify for a Super Final from the Elite League since Steelers in 2010. So for 7 seasons, no one's managed it. So yeah, you would have to expect that the Cup is a higher standard than the league. And I think I honestly think it'll be a massive achievement if we win it. And I think there is a possibility we could, to be honest. I mean, look, you only have to look at the performances we've already put in the Continental Cup.
True. Well, I suppose we will find out on the weekend of the 13th to the 15th of January. Not that long to wait now, actually, so we will see. Moving on to the last question regarding the Continental Cup. If we miss out on playoffs, Challenge Cup, which is likely on current form, but win the Continental Cup, will it be seen as enough success? Andy Haywood.
If we win the Continental Cup, then history will be made. And that, in its own right, is successful. On the back of, if we are, 7th in the league, we don't qualify for the playoffs, we get knocked out of the Challenge Cup, that's not a successful season, but you can't take away the fact that we've done something fantastic and that this team has done something special. And and it's quite an odd one, because from a personal standpoint, if we win the Continental Cup, it will rank up there as one of the greatest trophy victories that I would have seen in my time since I've been coming to hockey. But by the same token, we're sat here currently watching hockey that week in, week out is just poor. And like I say, obviously, if we don't win anything domestically and we finish so poorly in the league, then it is going to be a real sort of downer. And I don't think it'd help the fact that the Continental Cup would be the first thing. So obviously, if we win the Continental Cup in January, it'll be an incredible high. Everyone will be happy. Then in February, we get knocked out of the Challenge Cup, and mathematically we can't finish higher than fourth. And then March comes along, we get knocked out of the playoffs, and all of a sudden everyone would have forgotten about the Continental Cup, and it's down as a bad season. I think as a comparative, from recent times, you've only got to look at the CHL season, where we played and we did fantastically in the CHL, but the rest of the season was an absolute car crash, and it was terrible. And you kind of forget about quite how good it was when we were playing in that European Championship, and you forget about how great some of them games were and how well we played. And so I kind of get the feeling that we might end up in a little bit of that kind of situation where, because it's so early in our domestic season, if everything does, fall badly for us in the domestic season, then it kind of will overshadow and cloud the memories of what could be quite a fantastic achievement, not only for us but for the league.
I mean, I suppose that's one thing to kind of mention, if we do go on, and obviously it is an if, to go on and win the Continental Cup, then this team, whoever, it will be at that time, will actually go down in certainly Nottingham Panthers history, but also Elite League history as the first team to win the Continental Cup. And then on the other side of it, they will potentially also go down as one of the worst teams that's performed in the Elite League as a Panthers team. So it really is a kind of, just a swing of performance and how you view this team depending on the competition that it's in. But like I say, that's all an if, and we will find out in January. But thank you very much for those questions regarding that. Moving on. A couple of questions regarding university places, actually. And the first one comes from a Ginler from the Cage, and he says, university places, are they good or bad? We have 5 players on them this season, and important guys too. And having spoken to a couple of our other guys recently, they said training and fitness is being badly disrupted and affected because of it. And then obviously Anton Marijuana has got in touch and says, does having players on university courses prevent us from cutting them if they're underperforming? So first of all, JB, university places, do you think they're good or bad?
I think they're good because they help you attract a better quality of player who's probably coming towards their end of their career and looking beyond hockey. And it means you can get a better player because you can pay for their education. I think it costs something in the region of £30,000 for an overseas student to do a university degree in this country. So it's a big incentive. And if it wasn't working, then no club would offer it. And I think every single club in the Elite League offers a university deal. So I think they are a good thing for the quality of the player that you attract. I suppose then it comes down to how the club and the university work together to allow those players to be able to study, but also to be able to train as well. And I suppose that's where there may be some problems, because it may just be a case of the university and the club having to work a bit more closely in order for those players, because they are being paid by the club, therefore they have a responsibility for the club, so they should be at all the training sessions as well.
Okay, and just very quickly, Andy, obviously, I mean, regarding Ant's question, cutting them from the roster if they're underperforming, then that is going to look bad on the university, isn't it? Really, I suppose it's a tough situation, really, that the clubs put themselves in across the elite league with these deals.
Yeah, I suppose it is, but I suppose there's nothing to say that we could sack a player and they couldn't continue the course. I appreciate, obviously, that there'd be, the costs that have been incurred to, by the person that's at university, and obviously then you've got to delve into the world of, if they've been sacked, does it technically mean they've got to go home because their visas are warranted, are out of warranty and that kind of thing. I suppose it is a grey area, but I don't think it looks bad on the. I don't think it looks bad on the university. I think it makes us look bad from a university standpoint if we cut players that are on university deals. I think the university won't look bad because ultimately realistically it's got nothing to do with them. But I do think that obviously from a university standpoint, if you've got players that are constantly being gassed halfway through your university career, you end up just going to say, you know what, what's the point? We're not doing this anymore.
Okay, thank you for your questions, Aginla and Anton Marijuan. I hope the guys have answered it for you. We'll start to rattle through a few questions now as we come towards the end of the show. There's only 4 or 5 questions left. So obviously we've talked about players being gassed. You go to the forums, you listen to people talking in the street or even at the games in the pubs afterwards, and obviously, Corey is coming under pressure from some other people as well. So we kind of have to answer that question because Elaine Buck has sent a question in and she asks, who do you get to replace Corey? No one will come and work for GM. Gary Moran, I believe she's obviously referring to. Even McGrattan looks like he's been spun a yarn. Now, like I just said, obviously, Corey's coming under pressure. Some people think his time is up. So, if that was to be the case, who do you get to replace Corey? Like Elaine says, Andy, you come in first quickly on this, and then Jono, you can follow.
Ultimately, no idea. Basically, I think there is probably going to be names that get banded around, but I think ultimately, from our point of view, from a club point of view, invariably, I think realistically, if right now Corey was to go, it'd be given to Strax. I think if Corey and Strax were to go, I think you'd find that Clarkey and Brad Moran would probably end up taking it on. Is that a better situation than what we're in now? I don't think it is. And ultimately, you've got to, if you are going to look at things like making changes to coaching staff, you've got to be damn sure that you're getting the right guy in. Because if you don't, we could take 3 or 4 steps backwards quite easily. And that, people might say, well, look at where we are now in the league and stuff, but imagine being 4 or 5 steps back from this point as well. There's every chance that could happen. So ultimately, with regards who would replace Corey if Corey was to go, I genuinely don't know. And to be brutally honest, I don't know if we've got the contacts as a club that would warrant getting a real sort of superstar coach in. You've only got to look at our previous line of coaches. The links with the club are already well published, well publicised.
So Mike Ellis accepted.
Yeah, Mike Ellis accepted, and obviously he was signed from the league below because of his record in the league below. Spoke for itself. But realistically, everybody else, you look at Paul Adey, Mike Blaisdell, Corey himself, they've all had links to the club beforehand. And realistically, if that's the case, then it looks like we're going to be getting another sort of player coach maybe to start off with who will step behind the bench. And like I say, on current form, I'd say that the only person that would replace would end up being Brad Moran, and I don't think that that's anywhere near good enough.
Jono, just quickly answering Elaine's question.
There's an important part of that question that says no one will come and work for GM. I think that's the problem. I wouldn't replace Corey. I went on about this on Monday's podcast. I wouldn't replace Corey because I think he needs to become the central part of the organisation, and he's not at the minute. He's not the most important man in the organisation. And that's probably going to be unpopular with a lot of people listening to this, and not a majority view. But I don't think he needs to be replaced. I think attitudes need to change within the club, though.
Okay. Second part of that question, obviously mentioned McGrattan. Another quick question from Chris Gedney. McGrattan, how much is he actually contributing? Since Farmer, Brown and Nikiforuk are having to get way more physical, he's shown sparks of great skill, but is he more of a shower than a goer? Jono, you answer this question.
I got no problem with Brian McGrattan. I think he's doing the job that he was brought in to do. I think Brian McGrattan's biggest problem with a lot of people is that he's not Cam Jansen. And
he was never going to be.
No, and he wasn't. He's a better player than Cam Jansen. I think he brings a lot more people into the game. I think a lot of people are saying, oh, well, it's because he's got no points. If we look at the Continental Cup, in the last round, he scored 2 game-winning goals that got us through to the next round, to the final. So I don't have a problem with Brian McGrattan. He's a skillful player. He sticks up for the team. I think the problem is, from what a lot of people say, is that he's not Cam Jansen.
Okay. Thank you very much for your question, Chris. Moving on as we rattle through these last few. The next question, just a very, very quick answer from both of you, if I will, please. Dilly ding, dilly dong. How much do you think Corey wanted to punch GM after that Leicester City comment that obviously was made in an interview this week with Corey, quite, sort of frank and honest about the recent performances, and GM referred to Leicester City winning the league last season, but performing well in the Cups this year, but not performing well in the league. Dilly ding, dilly dong. Quick answer, JB.
I'm sorry, I can't be quick on this because
okay, go on then.
The
podcast might be extended, folks.
It was embarrassing. It was an embarrassing line of questioning. Corey was brilliant in that interview. He was honest. He said things that needed to be said, and the whole interview was ruined by stupid questions by the interviewer. And I'm sorry, as someone who does interviews, it was embarrassing.
Andy, you're a Leicester City fan, a very recent one from last season, I believe.
9 years ago, actually, but thank you.
Is that why there's a photo of you in a Nottingham Forest shirt as a kid? But anyway, moving on.
Yeah, when I was 5.
Oh, well, okay.
I've had Newcastle, Chelsea, Denmark and Ghana since then, mate.
Ghana. Obviously a trophy hunting fan.
The bandwagon will be arriving shortly.
Absolutely.
But Andy, just very quickly, because obviously we are running out of time and a few questions to answer still. But, I mean, it wasn't, let's be honest, as Jono says, Corey, very honest, very frank, what as fans wanted to hear for a long time. But the Leicester City question was just a little bit out of touch, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think, to be honest, I think the comparisons are kind of there in the sense that we've been so bad in the league, as Leicester have, and yet, obviously, tonight accepted because they've just been humped 5-0 in the Champions League. But they've ended up top in the Champions League. That
never happened to Forest.
Well, that's because they only had to play like 3 teams that made to win the trophy.
Dilly ding, dilly dong, come on.
Obviously, the issue and the comparisons I think are fair, but the whole, are you now going to have to answer all your questions in an Italian accent? It's ridiculous. It really was embarrassing. And like I say, I do see where the comparisons lie. And I do think, that it's probably fair that they could make that kind of comparison in an interview. I haven't got an issue with that. I just think the way that it was done was just ridiculously poor in such, as Jono said, in such an interview where it was open, it was honest, it was frank, it was what people wanted to hear, and then all of a sudden that just gets thrown out there, and it's almost just made a complete and utter mockery of the whole situation.
Okay, thank you very much for your question, Ali. Moving on to another question. What's the biggest factor relating to our current form? Lack of skill, lack of cohesion, or lack of motivation? And that comes from Richard Martin. Jono?
Lack of skill. Because I don't think we're as good as other teams, so lack of skill.
Okay, Andy?
Yeah, I'd agree. I genuinely just think that we aren't as good as other teams.
And do you basically think maybe we're just looking into it far too deep, and that is just the hard fact at the end of the day? We are just not good enough as many other teams in this league.
Yeah, I mean, I came out of Saturday's game after watching what I consider the best game we've seen all season as a fan. I wasn't at the Manchester Cup game, which I've heard was probably similar. But I was thoroughly entertained. I thought we played with passion and we looked like we cared, and we lost the game by 1 goal. And that sort of, to me, sums up the team in general, in the sense that, yes, there have been times when they don't look like they're interested, and we look like we've been severely shortchanged. But I think overall, I think we will see that this team isn't overly poor like it has been at times. I just don't think it's as good as some of the other teams in the league, and I think that ultimately is the short, the hard and fast answer is the fact that we've got some decent players, we'll score some good goals, we'll be in a couple of really good games this year, but ultimately we will probably lose them by 1 goal because we're not quite good enough.
Okay, keeping with the positivity, the next question, Dill1015 again from the cage. When was the last time you were this downbeat as a Panthers fan? Jono, you've been coming for a long, long time now.
Yeah, I tell you what, when I saw this question come in, I really had to think about it. And I think it was probably the last Super League season, which would be 2003. 2002-3 because that was built up as a great team, and it should, on paper, that team should have destroyed the league, and it just completely and utterly flattered to deceive. I remember we had Dodie Wood. He came off an absolutely brilliant couple of seasons in air, and he was shocking for us. And it was. I remember at the end of that season, that was when I was just really. I didn't actually renew my season ticket after that season, and I think it was another 3 or 4 seasons before I actually got a season ticket again. I was picking and choosing for a few seasons, and I've actually started to feel the same. It's like, do I renew my season ticket next season? That's actually going through my head at the moment. Well,
I'm gonna because you just link seamlessly to the next question and our final question.
It's like I've got an agenda in front of me, isn't it?
It really is. It's like what's about to come. It's just amazing.
Luckily, I didn't want to answer that question, obviously.
Don't you worry, Nottingham Forest fan. You'll get your say in this question as well. So Jordan Kelly asks, what do you think the knock-on effect will be next season on season ticket sales and attendances due to the team's performances this year and arguably since the Grand Slam year? As a season ticket holder from the Grand Slam year, unless there are changes at the club, I will not be purchasing one next year. Poor recruitment, a lack of entertainment, and results mean that I am losing interest rapidly. Apart from last year's team, it has been pretty dire since the Grand Slam. Andy, tie it all in. When was the last time you were downbeat, and how do you think this whole sort of feeling that's swirling around the club at the moment of being downbeat will affect next season?
Well, I think it will have a quite substantial effect for next season, because I think the people that are feeling that way are the people that have been coming longer. And I think they finally got to the stage where they are now completely fed up with it, that they are thinking that way. And obviously Jono's comment earlier on, and a few of the other sort of people that I know that have been going, a hell of a lot longer than I have, and they all kind of feel the same way because they've seen it time and time again, and nothing really changes. For me personally, there's been 2 seasons in the years that I've been going that will always stick out as being bad seasons. There was I think it was 14-15 season, which again I made reference to earlier on, where we did so well in the CHL. But that was a real horrible season to watch. We were just terrible, and players were really bad, despite CVs saying that they should have been good. And the other year was the Blaisdell year, because it was just mind-numbingly dull. And I appreciate that, Dan Tessier leaving early doors didn't help the cause, because that guy was incredible to watch. But those 2 seasons are sort of the 2 years that for me have been ridiculously poor, where I've sort of felt that they've been really bad seasons. And on current form, this will be the 3rd one, but I do think that there is potential that they can break out of that kind of category. Don't get me wrong, we're not going to win the league, and we're certainly not going to push for the league, but I certainly think that there's potential in this team, that there could be some excitement, there could be some more good games, and there could be some silverware. But I do think that the overall feel of the club and the overall sort of consequence will be that a lot of, well, not necessarily a lot, but the majority of the people that have this attitude of, I've had enough now, that's it, I'm not renewing my season ticket, will be the people that have been coming since pre-arena days.
I mean, Jono, obviously, as Andy said, briefly, you mentioned earlier that you're potentially thinking about, the whole season ticket for next season. Do you agree with Andy in the sense of, do you feel that's, you're not the only one out there that are contemplating it?
Definitely not, and I mean, Jordan's question proves that other people are thinking about it. It's stuff I've seen on social media, on the Cage, on Facebook, where people, and a lot of long-term fans as well, are thinking, this is it. If it doesn't start to improve, I'm off. And that's bad. And I think Paul mentioned it on Monday's podcast. If you start losing your core fan base, you've got problems. And if you don't listen to them, you're going to have bigger problems. And I think there should be a huge wake-up call to Neil Black and the rest of the management. This isn't good enough, and it needs to change. PDQ.
I mean, there's other questions that can go around this question and what you've just mentioned there, Jono, but we will save that for another podcast because we have rambled on for quite a bit. But I just want to say thank you to everybody who has sent in a question to us. I do hope that the guys have been able to answer it and give you some idea on their feelings towards what you've asked and giving you things to think about. If it wasn't for your questions, then obviously this podcast wouldn't survive. And we are very grateful for you sending them in. You can send questions in to us at any time. It just doesn't have to be when this podcast is live. To get in touch with us on Twitter at CatsWhiskersTV, just use the hashtag AskTCW. You will see posts on the Facebook pages of the Panthers, fan clubs, etc. And also there is a thread on the Cage. But all that's left for me to really say is, Andy, thank you very much for joining us this evening.
No bother.
Jono, thank you to you as well.
Pleasure as always.
And finally, just a big thank you again to everybody that's listened to this evening's Ask TCW podcast. It will be back next week, and we will be having
Sorry, it won't be back next week because we're playing Brayhead.
Don't worry, everybody. We'll edit
Couple
that
of weeks.
out. Nobody will ever know about that. What we'll do, Jono, is we'll just edit that because nobody's listening live anyway, so it's fine. Hang on a minute. The STCW podcast will be back in a couple of weeks because obviously we're playing Brayhead next week on a Wednesday. I knew that. Obviously, I was just messing with you fans out there.
You know I'm leaving that in.
Yeah, exactly. But enjoy the rest of your week. We will have a podcast later on in the week that looks ahead to the coming weekend against the Devils and the Coventry Blaze, and maybe a little feedback on obviously the Braid game that is on tomorrow, Thursday night. I'm just listening for Jono to say whether that will happen or not.
Yes, but tomorrow night, 8:45 as usual.
There you go, folks. Thanks very much for listening. This was the STCW podcast.